The most painful moment in life is not when someone leaves you, but when they finally realize your value after you have already moved on. On a cool autumn evening in downtown Chicago, the Grand Monarch restaurant glowed beneath golden lights that reflected against the glass towers surrounding the city. Inside, conversations flowed softly between successful executives, socialites, and investors enjoying another elegant night. At a corner table near the center of the dining room sat Michael Reynolds, a wealthy businessman whose name frequently appeared in business magazines and financial news headlines. Across from him sat Vanessa Harper, the woman who had entered his life shortly after his divorce. Vanessa was beautiful, confident, and perfectly comfortable in the luxurious world Michael had built around himself. She smiled as she described plans for an upcoming vacation while a waiter poured another glass of wine. Michael nodded politely, listening just enough to participate in the conversation. To anyone watching, they appeared happy, successful, comfortable. Yet beneath the polished exterior, something felt strangely empty. Michael could not explain it. His company was thriving. His investments were performing well. His social calendar remained full. Everything he once believed would bring fulfillment had arrived exactly as planned. Still, some nights carried a quiet dissatisfaction that no achievement seemed capable of fixing. Several tables away, another dinner was unfolding. Danielle Carter adjusted a silver bracelet on her wrist and smiled warmly at the man sitting across from her. 3 years had passed since her divorce, and life looked dramatically different from the woman who had once walked away from her marriage carrying heartbreak hidden behind dignity. She had rebuilt herself piece by piece. Her consulting company now worked with organizations across multiple states. She spoke at leadership events. She mentored young professionals. Most importantly, she had rediscovered the confidence she lost while trying to save a relationship that gradually stopped making room for her. The man beside her was Ethan Brooks, a respected investor known as much for his character as his wealth. Unlike many people in his position, Ethan rarely cared about appearances. He valued honesty, kindness, and emotional maturity. Those qualities were exactly what drew him toward Danielle. Over the past year, their friendship had slowly grown into something deeper. There was no drama, no games, no uncertainty. Ethan consistently showed up, listened carefully, and appreciated the woman Danielle had become. As they shared dessert and quiet laughter, Ethan reached into the pocket of his jacket. Danielle noticed the movement but thought little of it at first. Then he stood. Nearby conversations gradually slowed. Several diners glanced toward their table. Danielle looked up, confused. Ethan's expression carried a sincerity that instantly changed the atmosphere around them. At that exact moment, Michael happened to turn his head. His attention drifted across the room without purpose until his eyes landed on a familiar face. The world seemed to pause. Danielle. For several seconds he wondered if he was mistaken. But there was no mistake. It was her. She looked radiant beneath the restaurant lights. More confident than he remembered. More alive. Before Michael could fully process the shock, Ethan stepped beside Danielle's chair and lowered himself onto one knee. Gasps echoed softly throughout the restaurant. Danielle covered her mouth in surprise as Ethan revealed a small ring box. Every sound in the room seemed distant. Michael stared across the dining hall, unable to look away. He had arrived expecting an ordinary dinner. Instead, he was witnessing a moment that would force him to confront a truth he had avoided for years. And as Ethan began speaking from the heart, Michael felt something he had not experienced since the day his marriage ended. Regret. As Ethan held the ring box in his hands and the restaurant watched in anticipation, Michael remained frozen in his chair, unable to process the scene unfolding before him. The elegant dining room seemed to fade into the background as memories he had spent years avoiding suddenly returned with painful clarity. Before Danielle became the woman everyone admired, before conference stages and professional success, before the confidence that now illuminated her presence, she had simply been his wife. Years earlier, when Michael Reynolds was still fighting to establish himself in Chicago's competitive business world, Danielle had been the one person who believed in him without hesitation. Back then, his company occupied a modest office on the 12th floor of an aging downtown building. Investors rejected proposals. Deals collapsed unexpectedly. Some months felt like survival rather than progress. During those difficult seasons, Danielle stood beside him through every disappointment. She listened when frustration overwhelmed him. She encouraged him when confidence disappeared. She reminded him that temporary failures did not define permanent outcomes. While Michael spent long hours building his company, Danielle quietly helped hold their life together. She managed responsibilities at home, remembered important dates, organized family gatherings, and created a sense of stability that allowed him to focus entirely on his ambitions. She never complained about the sacrifices. In fact, she celebrated every small victory as if it belonged equally to both of them. When Michael secured his first major contract, Danielle surprised him with a homemade dinner and a handwritten card expressing how proud she was of his determination. He still remembered her smile that evening. At the time, he promised her that once success finally arrived, they would enjoy the rewards together. They would travel, spend more time together, slow down and appreciate everything they had worked so hard to build. Danielle believed every word. For a while, so did Michael. Then success arrived. The company expanded faster than anyone expected. New opportunities appeared constantly. Investors wanted meetings. Developers requested partnerships. Industry leaders began noticing his work. Every achievement opened the door to even greater possibilities. Michael became obsessed with maintaining momentum. At first, Danielle understood. Growth required commitment. She supported the long hours and frequent travel because she believed it was temporary. Yet temporary gradually became permanent. Business dinners replaced date nights. Weekend plans disappeared beneath unexpected meetings. Vacations were postponed indefinitely. Conversations became shorter. Promises became easier to make than to keep. Danielle never demanded luxury or attention. She only wanted presence. She wanted the man she married to remember that life existed beyond quarterly reports and expansion strategies. One evening, she spent hours preparing a special anniversary dinner at home. Candles illuminated the dining room. Soft music played in the background. She wore a navy dress Michael once told her was his favorite. The meal remained untouched as the clock moved from 7 o'clock to 9. Finally, a brief message appeared on her phone. Running late. Important client dinner. Do not wait up. Danielle stared at the screen for several seconds before quietly extinguishing the candles herself. Michael never saw the disappointment because he was too busy pursuing the next opportunity. Moments like that became increasingly common. What Michael failed to understand was that relationships rarely collapse because of one dramatic mistake. They weaken through countless small moments when someone feels unseen. Danielle continued supporting him, but a quiet sadness had begun settling inside her heart. Sitting across the restaurant years later, watching Ethan look at Danielle with complete admiration, Michael finally recognized something devastating. Ethan was valuing the very qualities Michael once took for granted. And as applause suddenly erupted around the room, Michael realized that the proposal happening before him was not simply the beginning of Danielle's future. It was a reflection of everything he had failed to appreciate when he still had the chance. The applause that filled the restaurant seemed distant to Michael as Ethan slipped the ring onto Danielle's finger and the guests around them celebrated the moment. Danielle's eyes shimmered with emotion as she smiled and embraced the man who had just asked her to share the rest of her life with him. It was a beautiful scene, the kind people remembered for years. Yet for Michael, it felt like watching a door quietly close forever. Sitting across from Vanessa, he forced himself to look away, but his thoughts refused to follow. They drifted backward into memories he had spent years avoiding. The truth was that success had not simply changed his schedule. It had changed him. As his company grew, so did his confidence, and eventually that confidence evolved into something more dangerous. He began believing that every sacrifice was justified because it served a greater purpose. Every missed dinner, every canceled trip, every forgotten promise. He convinced himself that providing financial security was the ultimate expression of love. Danielle saw things differently. She never asked for private jets or luxury vacations. She wanted conversation, partnership, presence. Unfortunately, those became the very things Michael had the least time to offer. The distance between them grew slowly enough that he barely noticed. Danielle would suggest spending a weekend together. Michael would promise next month. Danielle would ask him to attend an event important to her. Michael would explain that a client meeting could not be postponed. Danielle would try to talk about her own goals and interests, only to find the conversation shifting back toward business. None of these moments seemed significant by themselves. Together, They became the foundation of a loneliness neither of them knew how to fix. During that same period, Vanessa entered Michael's professional world. She worked in marketing and often attended networking events connected to several of his projects. At first, their interactions were entirely professional. Vanessa admired Michael's ambition and constantly praised his achievements. After spending years hearing concerns from Danielle about balance and family priorities, Michael found the admiration refreshing. He never stopped to question why. Vanessa saw the successful businessman everyone else saw. Danielle saw the exhausted man beneath the image. One perspective felt easier than the other. Over time, Michael began spending more energy on relationships that required less emotional accountability. He attended more events, more dinners, more social gatherings. Danielle noticed the changes. Immediately, she noticed how rarely he seemed interested in coming home. She noticed how conversations felt increasingly forced. Most painful of all, she noticed that she was slowly becoming a stranger inside her own marriage. One evening, after another canceled anniversary plan, Danielle sat alone in their living room while city lights glowed beyond the windows. When Michael finally arrived home hours later, she asked a simple question. "Are you still happy?" The question caught him completely off guard. Instead of answering honestly, he responded with frustration. He talked about pressure, responsibilities, and everything he was doing for their future. Danielle listened quietly before asking another question. "And what about our present?" Michael never answered. Looking back years later, he realized that conversation should have been a warning. Instead, he treated it as an inconvenience. Across the restaurant, Danielle laughed softly as Ethan spoke to her. The joy on her face looked natural, effortless. Michael could not remember the last time he had seen her smile that way during their marriage. That realization hurt more than he expected, because for the first time, he understood something painful. Danielle had not left because another man appeared. She had left because the man she loved stopped showing up long before the marriage officially ended. And as guests gathered around the newly engaged couple, Michael began to see the first signs of a truth that would soon become impossible to escape. Long before Ethan's proposal and long before the applause that now surrounded Danielle, there was a day when she finally accepted a truth she had spent years trying to avoid. It happened on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon. No dramatic argument took place. No shocking revelation changed everything. The house was quiet. Sunlight filtered through the living room windows, casting long shadows across photographs that documented a marriage once filled with hope. Danielle sat alone at the dining table reviewing notes from a leadership course she had recently begun attending. For the first time in years, she was investing energy into her own growth instead of focusing entirely on someone else's dreams. As she worked, she glanced at the clock. Michael had promised they would have dinner together that evening. It was a simple plan, nothing extravagant, just time together. Yet deep inside, she already knew what would happen. At 6 o'clock, the table was ready. At 7 o'clock, she checked her phone. At 8 o'clock, a message finally appeared. "Running late. Important meeting. We will talk tomorrow." Danielle stared at the screen without emotion. Strangely, she was not angry anymore. The disappointment that once hurt so deeply had slowly transformed into clarity. She realized she could predict the outcome before the promises were even made. Tomorrow would become next week. Next week would become next month. Another opportunity would always appear. Another reason would always exist. Michael was not choosing business over her one time. He had been making that choice repeatedly for years. When he finally arrived home later that night, Danielle was sitting quietly in the living room. Michael immediately launched into details about negotiations and potential partnerships. His excitement was genuine. He believed he was sharing good news. Halfway through the conversation, he noticed her expression. "What is wrong?" he asked. Danielle looked at him carefully. She remembered the young entrepreneur she married, the man who once spent hours talking about life, family, and shared dreams. Standing before her now was someone she barely recognized. Success had given him everything except the ability to see what he was losing. "I am tired," she answered honestly. Michael assumed she meant physically. "Things will settle down soon," he replied. "Once this project is finished, everything will be different." Danielle almost smiled. She had heard the same sentence for years. Different project, different timeline, same promise. "That is what you said last year," she said softly. The silence that followed felt heavier than any argument. Over the next several weeks, Danielle spent long hours reflecting on her future. She met with an attorney. She spoke with trusted friends. Most importantly, she listened to herself. The answer she kept discovering was painful but unavoidable. She could not save a marriage by herself. Love required two people moving toward each other. She had spent years taking those steps alone. The day she handed Michael the divorce papers felt surreal. He looked genuinely shocked, confused, hurt. He insisted they could fix everything. He promised to make changes. He promised to create balance. He promised to prioritize their relationship. Danielle believed he meant every word. The problem was not sincerity. The problem was timing. The promises arrived after years of neglect rather than during them. "I do not hate you," she told him calmly. "That is what makes this so difficult. But I cannot keep waiting for a version of our life that never arrives." Tears filled Michael's eyes as reality finally began settling in. Yet Danielle remained composed. Not because she felt nothing. Because she had already mourned the marriage long before that conversation happened. Several months later, she walked out of the courthouse carrying a small folder containing finalized documents. The autumn wind brushed gently against her face as she stepped onto the sidewalk. Behind her stood the life she once imagined would last forever. Ahead of her stood uncertainty. But for the first time in years, uncertainty felt less frightening than staying where she was. The months following the divorce were far more difficult than Danielle allowed most people to see. Friends often praised her strength, but strength did not erase loneliness. It simply allowed her to keep moving while carrying it. She rented a modest apartment overlooking a quiet section of the Chicago River and began rebuilding her life one day at a time. The first few weeks felt unfamiliar. There were no shared schedules to coordinate, no expectations to manage, no constant waiting for someone else's attention. At first, the silence felt uncomfortable. Then gradually, it became peaceful. For years, Danielle had devoted so much energy to supporting Michael's dreams that she had forgotten many of her own. Now she finally had space to rediscover them. She returned to the leadership program she had once postponed because family responsibilities always seemed more urgent. She attended workshops, networking events, and professional conferences. Every new experience reminded her that she possessed talents she had neglected for far too long. The transformation did not happen overnight. There were setbacks. There were moments of doubt. Some evenings, she questioned whether starting over at this stage of life was realistic. Yet every time uncertainty appeared, she reminded herself of something important. She was no longer building a future based on promises. She was building one based on action. Over time, Danielle developed a consulting business focused on leadership development and organizational culture. The idea grew from years of observing how companies operated and how people often felt unseen inside successful organizations. Her experiences had taught her that achievement meant very little when relationships were ignored. She understood both business and human connection, a combination many companies desperately needed. The beginning was humble. Her office consisted of a small rented workspace with a desk, a laptop, and a whiteboard filled with goals. Some weeks brought new clients. Other weeks brought nothing at all. Still, Danielle refused to quit. Every challenge strengthened her confidence. Every small success reinforced her belief that she was capable of creating something meaningful. Gradually, word began spreading. Clients appreciated her insight. Organizations valued her ability to inspire teams while addressing practical business concerns. Invitations arrived from professional associations requesting presentations and workshops. Her calendar slowly filled with opportunities she never imagined possible. More importantly, she started recognizing herself again. The woman staring back from the mirror looked different. Not because of appearance, but because of confidence. She no longer entered rooms hoping others would validate her worth. She carried herself with quiet certainty. One autumn afternoon, while speaking at a regional leadership conference, Danielle delivered a presentation about resilience and personal growth. The audience listened attentively as she described how people often discover their greatest strengths after life's most painful transitions. When the session ended, dozens of attendees approached her with questions and appreciation. Among them stood a man she had never met before. Ethan Brooks introduced himself with a warm smile and sincere compliment about her presentation. Unlike many wealthy investors Danielle encountered through professional events, Ethan seemed uninterested in impressing anyone. He listened carefully, asked thoughtful questions, treated every person with equal respect. Their conversation lasted only a few minutes before other attendees pulled them in different directions. Yet something about the interaction stayed with Danielle. For the first time in years, she met someone who seemed genuinely interested in who she was rather than what she could offer. As she left the conference center that evening and watched the Chicago skyline glow beneath the setting sun, Danielle felt something she had not experienced in a very long time. Hope. Not hope that someone else would complete her life. Hope that the future might hold possibilities she had never allowed herself to imagine. The first meeting between Danielle and Ethan could have easily become a brief professional interaction forgotten within days. Instead, it became the beginning of something neither of them expected. After the leadership conference, Ethan sent a simple email thanking Danielle for her presentation and sharing several thoughts about her message. There was nothing overly personal or dramatic about it. He simply expressed appreciation for her perspective and wished her continued success. Danielle responded politely, assuming that would be the end of their communication. It was not. Over the following months, their paths crossed at additional professional events throughout Chicago and New York. Each conversation seemed easier than the last. Ethan possessed a rare ability to make people feel heard. When Danielle spoke about her work, he listened carefully instead of waiting for his turn to talk. When she shared ideas, he treated them seriously. He asked thoughtful questions. He remembered details. Most importantly, he never made her feel as though she needed to prove her value. That alone felt unfamiliar. One evening after a leadership symposium, Ethan invited Danielle to join several colleagues for dinner. The gathering was casual and relaxed. Throughout the evening, Danielle observed how Ethan treated everyone around him. Waiters, event staff, young professionals, senior executives. His respect never changed based on someone's status. Character revealed itself in small moments, and Ethan seemed full of them. As their friendship developed, Danielle found herself looking forward to their conversations. There was no pressure, no complicated expectations. She had spent years in a relationship where emotional connection gradually disappeared beneath responsibilities and distractions. With Ethan, connection existed naturally. They discussed books, travel, community projects, business ideas, and life experiences. Some conversations lasted 15 minutes. Others stretched late into the evening. Time seemed to move differently when they spoke. For the first time since her divorce, Danielle allowed herself to consider a possibility she once rejected completely. Perhaps love could feel peaceful rather than exhausting. Meanwhile, Ethan admired Danielle for reasons that extended far beyond her accomplishments. He knew about her professional success, but what impressed him most was how she carried herself. She never spoke bitterly about the past. She never sought sympathy. Despite everything she had endured, she remained kind, optimistic, and generous. Ethan recognized a strength that many people overlooked because it appeared so graceful. One winter afternoon, they volunteered together at a community leadership program for high school students. As Danielle encouraged young participants and celebrated their ideas, Ethan quietly watched from across the room. At that moment, he understood something important. The qualities he admired most about her had nothing to do with business success. They came from who she was when nobody expected anything from her. Over the next year, their friendship slowly evolved into something deeper. Danielle approached the relationship cautiously. She had learned difficult lessons about trust and expectations. Ethan respected that completely. He never rushed her, never pressured her. Instead, he remained consistent, reliable, present. Every quality she once wished for appeared naturally through his actions. The contrast became impossible to ignore. One evening, while walking beside the Chicago River beneath thousands of city lights, Ethan paused and looked toward the skyline. "You know what I admire most about you?" he asked. Danielle smiled. "What is that?" Ethan thought for a moment before answering. "You rebuilt your life without letting hardship change your heart." The words stayed with her long after the conversation ended. Because unlike compliments about appearance or success, this one reflected something deeper. It reflected understanding. Months later, Ethan began quietly planning a special evening. He selected the Grand Monarch restaurant because it overlooked the city where Danielle rebuilt her life. He arranged every detail carefully, wanting the moment to feel meaningful rather than extravagant. As he finalized preparations, he felt surprisingly nervous. Not because he doubted his feelings, because he understood exactly how extraordinary Danielle was. And on the evening when fate would place Michael Reynolds in the same restaurant, Ethan arrived carrying a small ring box and a question that would change all of their lives forever. The applause continued for several moments after Danielle accepted Ethan's proposal, but for Michael Reynolds, every sound inside the restaurant seemed distant and distorted. Guests smiled, waiters offered congratulations, and several diners discreetly recorded the unforgettable moment on their phones. Yet Michael remained completely still. Across the table, Vanessa noticed the change in his expression almost immediately. "Michael, are you okay?" she asked softly. He looked toward her, but struggled to answer. The question itself felt impossible. How could he explain what he was feeling when he barely understood it himself? He had spent years convincing himself that the past belonged in the past. He had built a successful life, a respected career, new relationships, new routines. Yet watching Danielle smile as another man placed a ring on her finger had shattered an illusion he did not realize he was still carrying. Somewhere deep inside, he had always assumed there would be time. Time to apologize. Time to reconnect. Time to prove that he had changed. Now, for the first time, he was forced to confront the possibility that time had quietly run out. Across the room, Ethan stood beside Danielle with a look of genuine admiration. It was a look Michael recognized immediately because he remembered feeling that way once. Years ago, before meetings replaced conversations and ambition replaced attention, he had looked at Danielle the same way. Back when her happiness mattered as much as his own. Back when their future felt shared rather than separate. As the newly engaged couple spoke with guests, Michael found himself observing details he never noticed before. Ethan listened when Danielle spoke. He maintained eye contact. He seemed fully present. Nothing distracted him. Nothing appeared more important than the woman standing beside him. The realization stung. Not because Ethan was wealthier or more successful. Michael had never measured himself that way. The pain came from recognizing that Ethan valued the very things Michael once overlooked. Vanessa followed his gaze toward Danielle and Ethan. The silence between them became uncomfortable. She had known about Michael's marriage, of course. Everyone in his social circle knew. But this was different. She was witnessing emotions he had never shown before. "You still care about her," Vanessa said quietly. Michael looked away from the crowd. For several seconds, he considered denying it. Instead, he answered honestly, "I never stopped caring." The words surprised even him. Vanessa nodded slowly. There was no anger in her response. Only understanding. Sometimes the truth becomes obvious long before people are willing to admit it. Later that evening, as guests gradually left the restaurant, Michael found himself standing near the entrance. He had no plan, no intention of interrupting Danielle's celebration. Yet something kept him from leaving. Eventually, Danielle and Ethan approached the lobby area together. Danielle noticed Michael almost immediately. For a brief moment, their eyes met. The years between them seemed to disappear. Michael expected awkwardness, perhaps discomfort. Instead, Danielle offered a warm smile. "Congratulations," he said sincerely, looking at both of them. Ethan thanked him politely. Danielle's smile softened. "Thank you, Michael." The exchange lasted less than a minute. No dramatic confrontation occurred. No emotional speeches followed. Yet within those few seconds, Michael understood more than he had during the previous 3 years combined. Danielle looked genuinely happy. Not because she was engaged. Not because she found someone wealthy. She looked happy because she had finally built a life that reflected her worth. As Danielle and Ethan walked out into the Chicago night together, Michael remained standing beneath the restaurant's golden lights. For years, he believed losing his marriage was the consequence of bad timing and conflicting priorities. Tonight, he finally understood the deeper truth. Danielle had not left because another man offered her something better. She left because she learned she deserved better long before another man ever arrived. The days following the engagement passed quietly, but Michael Reynolds found it increasingly difficult to focus on anything else. Meetings continued. Contracts required attention. Investors expected results. Outwardly, nothing had changed. Internally, everything had. For years, he had measured success through numbers, growth charts, acquisitions, and achievements. Now, for the first time, those accomplishments felt strangely hollow. The image that continued returning to his mind was not Ethan kneeling with a ring. It was Danielle's face. Not because she looked beautiful, although she did. Not because she was moving on, although she clearly had. It was because she looked at peace. That was the detail Michael could not stop thinking about. One Saturday morning, unable to concentrate at home, he drove through downtown Chicago without a destination. The city bustled with its usual energy. People hurried between coffee shops, parks, and weekend activities. Life continued moving forward whether individuals were ready or not. Eventually, Michael parked near the river walk and began walking. As he passed families, couples, and groups of friends, memories surfaced unexpectedly. He remembered mornings when Danielle used to suggest simple weekend outings. Farmers markets, small neighborhood restaurants, walks along the water, activities he often dismissed because work seemed more important. Looking back, he realized those moments were never about the activities themselves. They were opportunities to share life together. Opportunities he repeatedly overlooked. Later that afternoon, Michael entered a small bookstore he had not visited in years. While browsing aimlessly, he noticed a familiar voice speaking near the community events section. Turning toward the sound, he froze. Danielle stood several feet away, participating in a local leadership discussion. She looked relaxed and confident as she answered questions from attendees. Michael remained near the back of the room, listening quietly. The woman speaking now seemed different from the wife he remembered. Not because she had become someone new, because she had become fully herself. When the event ended, several people approached Danielle for advice and conversation. She greeted each person warmly. Eventually, their eyes met across the room. For a brief moment, surprise crossed her face before she smiled. "Michael," she said, "I did not expect to see you here." "Neither did I," he admitted. They stepped outside together, standing near the entrance beneath a clear autumn sky. The conversation began politely. They discussed work, mutual acquaintances, and community projects. Yet beneath the surface lingered years of unspoken understanding. Finally, Michael took a deep breath. "I owe you an apology," he said. Danielle looked at him quietly. "For what?" Michael laughed softly, though there was sadness behind it. "For more things than I can count." Danielle remained silent, allowing him to continue. "I spent years believing I was building a better future for us. Somewhere along the way, I stopped paying attention to the person standing beside me." His voice carried sincerity rather than self-pity. "You deserved more than promises. You deserved presence." Danielle listened without interruption. There was no anger in her expression, no desire to revisit old wounds, only calm understanding. After several moments, she nodded gently. "I know you believed you were doing the right thing," she said. "That was never the problem." Michael lowered his eyes. He understood exactly what she meant. Good intentions could not replace consistent actions. "I am sorry it took me so long to understand." Danielle offered a small smile. Sometimes lessons arrive when they are supposed to. The statement was simple, yet its meaning landed heavily. She was not speaking with bitterness. She was speaking with acceptance. As they prepared to leave, Michael noticed the engagement ring resting on her hand. Sunlight reflected softly against the stone. For the first time since the restaurant, he truly understood what it represented. It was not the loss of a second chance. It was evidence that Danielle had found happiness after choosing herself. And as she walked away toward the life she had built, Michael finally accepted a painful truth. Some mistakes can be forgiven, but not every opportunity returns once it is gone. Several months passed after the conversation outside the bookstore, and life continued moving forward for everyone involved. Winter slowly gave way to spring, and Chicago once again filled with color, energy, and possibility. Danielle's business continued expanding beyond anything she once imagined. Organizations from across the country invited her to speak about leadership, resilience, and personal growth. Yet despite the recognition and success, the achievement she valued most could not be measured by awards or revenue. For the first time in many years, she felt completely at peace with herself. The woman who once waited for someone else to choose her had finally learned how to choose herself first. Ethan remained exactly who he had always been: supportive, consistent, present. As their wedding plans gradually took shape, Danielle often found herself appreciating the simplicity of their relationship. There was no uncertainty, no need to compete with careers, distractions, or priorities. They celebrated each other's victories and supported each other through challenges. The partnership felt balanced in a way she once believed only existed in stories. One evening, They attended a charity gala overlooking Lake Michigan. As guests gathered beneath elegant lights and soft music filled the room, Ethan quietly took Danielle's hand. "Are you happy?" he asked. Danielle smiled. The question instantly reminded her of a conversation from years earlier, a conversation that had once revealed the cracks inside a marriage. This time, however, the answer came easily. "Yes," she replied. "I really am." Across the city, Michael Reynolds was learning his own lessons. The months following his encounter with Danielle forced him to examine choices he had avoided confronting for years. He spent less time chasing every opportunity and more time evaluating what truly mattered. Some relationships faded, others strengthened. For the first time in his adult life, he began creating space for things beyond business success. The process was not easy. Regret rarely disappears completely. Yet Michael gradually understood that regret could serve a purpose when it inspired growth rather than self-punishment. He could not rewrite the past, but he could become a better version of himself because of it. One afternoon, while speaking with a group of young entrepreneurs, Michael shared something he would never have admitted years earlier. "Do not make the mistake of believing success will compensate for neglected relationships," he told them. "The people who stand beside you during the difficult years deserve your attention during the successful years too." The room grew quiet as listeners absorbed the message. Those words were not coming from a business executive. They were coming from a man who had learned an expensive lesson. Months later, fate created one final intersection between the former husband and wife. At a community leadership event, Michael and Danielle found themselves attending the same reception. There was no tension, no lingering resentment. Only mutual respect. They spoke briefly about work, community projects, and life. Before leaving, Michael smiled sincerely. "You look happy," he said. Danielle nodded. "I am." Michael glanced toward Ethan, who was speaking with several guests nearby. "He is a good man." Danielle followed his gaze and smiled. "Yes, he is." For a moment, neither person said anything. Then Michael extended his hand. "I wish you both the best." Danielle accepted the gesture warmly. "Thank you, Michael." As they walked in opposite directions, both understood something important. Their story was never really about loss. It was about growth. Danielle discovered her worth and built a life filled with purpose, love, and dignity. Michael learned that success means very little if the people who matter most feel invisible. And somewhere beneath the lights of a city that had witnessed both heartbreak and healing, two people finally found what they needed. One found happiness, the other found wisdom, and both found peace.